Okay, very good. So a very warm welcome and a good morning to all of you. It's a real pleasure to see you here on the last day of the World Urban Forum, 9 a.m. in the morning. You almost made it. It has been a marathon. So it's a real pleasure to see you here and to attend this session, which is a One UN event. A One UN event that will be focusing on public spaces for children. And it has been co-organized by colleagues from UN Habitat, UNICEF, and the World Health Organization. And maybe just as an introduction, you know, public spaces are a key determinant of health and well-being and development for children. Public spaces are, you know, the place where children can play, where they can learn, where they actually can interact and grow also socially. That's where actually they are also very often confronted to the urban fabric and also to environmental health related issues, and where they actually can even learn, right, how to deal with their immediate environment, and also maybe, hopefully, learn to be, you know, environmentally motivated, taking the right actions. So public spaces for children are crucial for, again, development, health, and well-being, and a lot of different factors. Now, we know that among 40% of the populations have actually access to open public spaces. In low and middle-income countries, actually, this is more around 30%. But if we look at those 30%, it doesn't mean that those public spaces are actually conducive to health and well-being and to development. Because maybe the quality of the public space is not adequate for ensuring this, for safety reasons, for health reasons, for a lot of other threats they can be confronted to. So having this in mind, the three organizations have been really, you know, bringing together the efforts in order to try and come up with guidance to address the need of shaping public spaces in a way that they are going to be conducive to well-being and development. And this is something that is actually a follow-up of a joint work that WHO and UN Habitat did a couple of years ago when we developed a guidance on including health in urban and territorial planning. And when that guidance came out, there was the recognition that this needed to be, you know, put one step further, looking at very specific population groups that are, you know, relevant for our societies, which, you know, are our futures. So having this in mind, we have been continuing our strong collaboration with UNICEF and have been looking at the possibility of really streamlining the efforts and coming up with practices, best practices, principles, and also policies, recommendations for action. So it's a real pleasure to have you here and to have our panel. And I am representing WHO. My name is Natalie Rebel. I am the lead for the urban health work. And the two co-leads for this exercise and this, I would say, adventure, because it has been an adventure. It has been going on for quite some time now. My colleague, Jose Chong, who is the lead for the public spaces work in UN Habitat, and Thomas George, who is the lead for the urban work in UNICEF. And we are joined today here by a fantastic panel that has actually the key insight, that has been working on this topic for years, have been producing guidance documents, have on-the-ground practical experience to make this agenda really successful. And so today, and I will introduce them one by one as we go, we would like to hear from them about the work that they have been doing, how this relates to the guidance document that we have been producing, and to collectively brainstorm of how to make sure that all these documents, all these activities are actually best implemented at the very country level, at the local level, but also what is needed at the national level to make this actually happen. So we want, as an outcome of this session, on one hand, to present to you the guide and the additional documents, but most importantly, we want this to be really a dialogue, an exchange, to hear from you and from the panel of how to make this, you know, efficient, how to implement it, how to make it, you know, taken up by all the policymakers and all the stakeholders that are relevant in this field. And with this, I would like to hand over immediately to my colleagues Thomas and Jose, who will be presenting the document that we are almost finalizing. So you see here, we call it a sneak preview. It's like to being at the movies, right? You get a little bit, right? But you don't have the full movie. You will get it soon because it's still under finalization. Just a couple more, weeks and months to go. We are planning to have it ready early in 2025. So today it's a sneak preview, but a sneak preview that really will give you the highlights and also the key concept and principles that we are using in this area of work. So with this, I'm handing over to Jose and Thomas, and I think it's Thomas who starts. Over to you. Do you want to come from the floor? Or you want from here?
Yeah.
You prefer from there?
Thank you, Natalie. It's been 4 years. I remember distinctly. It was in Abu Dhabi WUF that we started the first consultation, and that had a background to it. UNICEF had relaunched its urban programs in 2017, and till then we were focusing on services for children. And in the 2017 urban strategy, we added an element of the environment for children. So our quest was to see how the neighborhoods can be the primary nurturing spaces for children. And when we looked at the urban planning or child-responsive urban planning, we felt that there was very little literature available on that, and so we commissioned a work which is now available as a handbook on child-responsive planning. And public spaces is one of the principles of child-responsive urban planning. And when we looked at it again, we found that there were different definitions going around, different numbers going around. So we thought that we have to collaborate with UN Habitat and WHO, who are the relevant agencies, and make sure that there is something which brings all of this together, which can be useful for the practitioners, for national governments, for local governments, and for other civil society organizations who are working on this. So after a lot of thought and a lot of discussion, we landed on this name Spaces. You will get to know why it's called Spaces later. And it's a guide to recreating public space for urban children. And when we are talking about urban children, we are talking about the 1.3 or 1.4 billion children living in across the world, and out of which about 500 million live in informal settlements and slums. So this guide has got, we start with the definition of public space of children, because we found that in many cities, the city officials, for them, public spaces were only playgrounds and parks, but streets were not included, or other public spaces were not included. So a definition of that. What are the scales, categories, and the different contexts that we have? Identify what are the key issues, challenges, and involved in both designing and managing the public spaces. And also addressing the need to make sure that there is community participation, there's child participation in the planning, design, creation, and maintenance of these spaces. It felt that in many instances, beautiful places are created for children, but managed not so well, and then, the whole thing goes to waste. It's structured around 6 key principles, and it offers, the guide offers a rationale for each principle with a broad set of associated recommendations, which Jose will take us through later. As Natalie said, about 44% of urban residents have access to open public spaces, but significantly lower in the developing economies, only 30%. And you will also see that the 30% of urban dwellers who have access to these convenient open public spaces are mostly in the first or second wealth quintile. 56%, these are the challenges, the rapid urbanization that's happening. And we know that it's 56% in 2021, set to rise to 60 by 2030, and 70 by 2050. Some of the regions are more rapidly urbanizing, 500 million children living in slums. And what's also important to note is that about 100 million children are street connected, And these children are from the lower, the third and fourth wealth quintiles. They live on the street, some of them, many of them work on the streets, and with very limited access to other open public spaces, but streets are also public spaces. What's also important is to note that 50 to 80% of internally displaced people, I mean, these figures keep changing, but what we need to keep in mind is that a large number, and 60% of refugees also settle into urban areas, and that too into the poor urban areas. So while we make an effort to define public spaces, we feel that these are places that children learn from, these are places children care for, these are places that support children's free action and nurture children's cultures, and the different spatial scales have to be taken into account, the specific categories of public spaces and the context, the three contexts in which they exist. So our attempt to define public spaces is that places that can be freely accessed and enjoyed by all children, either alone or with friends or family, regardless of gender, ethnicity, in a sense that it's non-discriminatory. These public spaces should be safe, no matter what the context. If you have gone deep into the slums and informal settlements, the kind of fear children live there, even on the roads while walking and while even spending time in their public spaces. These spaces also should be places that children learn from and care for, and it supports their free, spontaneous action, not for structured activity. Public spaces should also be created with children's participation and contribute to promoting public health in the rapidly urbanizing cities and towns. So in this guide, we are looking at three different contexts. One is the planned environment, which usually that's where you see public spaces now coming up. The informal settlements and slums, where even there is no house. How can the vulnerability the children face in these settings is of the household vulnerability, the neighborhood vulnerability, and also the social vulnerability. So how can public spaces address these three vulnerabilities? And in crisis and resilience building settings, where public spaces, safe public spaces, has always been a part of humanitarian action, but how can we get it better? I wouldn't go into this slide. We can share the presentation. It's categorizing the public spaces at the housing scale, the neighborhood scale, and the city scale, and what kind of spaces are available in these two. Over to Jose.
Thanks a lot, George, for the Thomas George for the presentation. I think it was very well as an introduction, and maybe I will focus why spaces. And I think this thing, since we are talking about public spaces, when we were trying to think about the principles, and actually maybe to mention that is we had a lot of background research on this one. We went through a large amount of literature of what is available online in academic journals and in the different guides to have this initial document. Will be at the end is the problem was how to summarize. We will have around a 60 pages document, but also we have a lot of case studies that is we wanted to in some point put it available online to every researcher to have access. But the spaces is basically the summary of the 6 principles that we are having. The first principle is safe and protection. Children's, and the second one, display, recreation, and development needs. I will go specifically on each of the principles with some examples. Accessibility, where is greatest needs, children's health and well-being, equity, inclusion, and sustainability resilience. So basically, it's the acronym that is can help us to understand that actually each of these principles are important when we are talking about child-friendly public spaces. So I wanted to enter to the first principle, safety and protection, and it's this is something that is quite important here, highlighting for instance a refugee camp in Lebanon, where the only place where the children feel safe is in this adapting like these settings. And like this is a project, for instance, like from UNICEF, like together like with some partners, like for instance, Catalytic Action, to make like for example some solutions as making the environment safer like through good lighting, child-friendly facilities, and protected areas. This is quite important when we are talking about crisis context, and actually this is one of the main additions of this guide, where we have, as Thomas was saying, a lot of the literature that is online is available like for formal settings, but not like when we are talking slums and informal neighborhoods, and particularly on crisis context, where you have to integrate the migrants and the families. The second principle, that is a more conventional one, that is a play, recreation, and developmental needs. And it's like we all of the audience know that it's the importance of play in general, but also free play. And it's like a non-structural play sometimes. It's like there is a conception that it's only playgrounds, it's the places where the children play, but it's like how we change that like to the whole city is a place where the children can play freely. No? So it's like some solutions that are stated there, but it's for instance, even like highlighting like some projects like from some of the partners, like for example, Van Leer with the program Urban 95 that they have on a strategy of pocket parks in deprived neighborhoods in Recife. No? So this is quite important, how to use the different spaces that you have in the city. And actually, on the research was quite important when we were investigating about what are the spaces that are in proximity and necessary like for the children, like it appeared like a category of the liminal space. So like this in-between space between the house and the public space, that this was quite fundamental because it's in proximity to the place of residence. Accessibility, this is quite fundamental, and this like we are working, and actually this is some of the main categories that we are working like from the habitat side, like this accessibility to a convenient public space, but accessibility with quality next to the home, but also next like to the places that the children go. The main route is mainly like to go to school, so how we can ensure safe schools, safe routes, and then like to also like to have amenities in between the school and the residence. So I think like this is quite fundamental. Certain cities are having a lot of initiatives on safe routes, and it's only an example here like from Barcelona, that also integrating like with other planning policies related to public spaces. Child and health well-being, principle 4, this is quite fundamental, and this like, had a big role actually, and a lot of expertise like from WHO put in the agenda of child health, and we can see examples, and particularly here, example of Nairobi in Kenya, where UN Habitat headquarters is located. This is an initiative, for instance, like to improve public facilities, toilets, and sanitation facilities for people who are living in the slums. No? So this is in Kibera, like there is approximately 400,000 inhabitants. So it's like a different census data, but it's very big challenges, and it's like these kind of spaces and communal spaces become a important public space for children, like to assure child health and well-being. Sorry. Oops. Equity and inclusion, this is also one of the main principles, and this is quite important when we are talking about, for example, integration of migrant population, no? Like the ones that we were talking, but also ethnic minorities that are in the cities, and even like, for example, stigmatization when depending of the area of where you are living in the city. I think this is important, and it's like in reality in our when we have like this kind of participatory processes in our experience, it's very nice like to see children how they can play depending and despite of their different backgrounds. No, so but I think like at this we have to be very inclusive, like and think about this condition when we are doing the public space design and also the implementation of projects, like to assure integration between like a different populations and different urban childs. Only to highlight, like this was an example like from Indonesia, and I taking the case studies like from from the publication. That is like in the case of Indonesia, they have a national program like to have like a child-friendly public spaces. So it is an innovative practice also at the national level, and the importance of coordination between national and local governments like to have like real policies and change. Finally, the final principle, sustainability and resilience. So it's like now we had a lot of sessions, for instance, on climate action, nature-based solutions, and actually one of the findings and a lot of literature and partners saying the importance to have urban nature in cities. This is quite fundamental. This is something that is lacking, and actually in our research, it seems that it's reducing. So it is active that we have to incorporate more nature in cities. This is only like as an experience, like we use Minecraft through block by block methodology from Habitat, like to use gaming, like to have like a participatory design with kids. And actually, in one of the when we do analysis of what is the children's needs, normally they ask us a lot for vegetation, flora, and fauna, no, and fauna especially on the public space. So I think like this is something to consider when we are having a design and improving public space in general. I wanted to end up with this one. So apart from the principle, like we have also a methodology how to go like from conceptualization and engagement activities, and this is the normal planning processes, but also how to map and document existing spaces. There is not much actually when we go. From our experience, there is little research sometimes like from local governments about availability of public spaces in cities, less about what is child-friendly public spaces. We had like a great example together with UNICEF in Sharjah. That is, for example, one of the main challenges like was to analyze public space related to children. And also then as activities planning and co-designing with kids, there is a lot of methodologies available from the different partners, budgeting and financing, implementation, and one of the key issues is management and maintenance. So we have to be actively working through the management and maintenance of public space, how to provide activities, placemaking, programming of the space is quite fundamental when we are talking about child-friendly cities and child-friendly public space, and this should be also a component, not only the physical implementation, but also the soft programming of the space. I will leave it here. Thanks a lot, and maybe Thomas to finalize.
Yeah, just to add that we need to acknowledge at this point Sudeshna Chatterjee and her team, who did massive work on getting the literature out and contacting a lot of people across the world to get the case studies. So it took almost 2 years for them to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas and Jose. And you see from the presentation of the Spaces Guide that this is truly reflecting what urban health, and urban development means. It looks at the interconnectedness of health, development. It looks at the fact that we need to look at specific vulnerable population groups, right, that are most important in our urban areas. It looks at the fact that everything is interconnected, and if we want to be effective, we need to make sure that all the different sectors, right, are going in the same direction. So this guidance is really important to really highlight the urban health and the investment in urban development overall. And as Thomas was saying, this work is really based on Sudeshna's, incredible contribution and team, and actually is based on an extensive evidence reviews that is really trying to look at all the available evidence and all the available guidance that has already been produced, and trying to bring this under this, umbrella. And so with this, I would like to hand over to our podium and to our very special guests that have been working in this field for many, many years. And before doing so, maybe I can kindly ask also Mariana to be joining. She had some transportation-related issues, but we are very, very happy to have her here. So thanks a lot, Mariana, and welcome. And so our guests will really be able to tell us more about what has been done, how to actually, align forces, and have collectively thinking of how to implement the guide. Thomas and Jose have put up one slide at the end about implementation, and I think this is the most important, because we can come up with any guidance that we want, right? But at the end, this guidance needs to be implemented. We need to make sure that this is being picked up, that it's being understood, that it's being identified as a priority, and we need to identify those means, right, that are necessary to make it happen on the ground. And we are sure that in the conversations today, we can, go one step further. So today, we have representatives from a number of societies, but also of different local governments that have been working in this field. And I would like to start by Rushda Manjit, who is the Chief Program Officer from the Van Leer Foundation. Rushda has been really, leading in this area of work for many years, has started her work in India, but then has expanded her work globally. And very importantly, one of the key areas of work of Rushda is really to make sure that innovative partnerships, are being developed at the intersection between those key sectors that are actually important to make, this work. Urban planning, health, innovation, and then child and education, related organizations and sectors. I don't want to go into much detail about your, biography, but I think these are really the things that are important to make this agenda going forward. So, Rushda, please, over to you to share a little bit of the work that you've been doing and also how you see the interconnectedness. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie, and of course to all of you for the presentation earlier. Congratulations on the launch of this guide, very much needed. And I must say it's a topic that's very close to our heart at Van Leer. A little bit about Van Leer, for those of you who don't know us, we are a Dutch philanthropy. We are based in the Netherlands and we work all over the world. We have a single-minded focus. We have been working on one thing for the past 60 years, and that's been on early childhood. Of course, talking about intersections, we come at it from different sectors. We look at health, education, early learning, also cities, urban trends, and so on. How do they affect a child? But we have been working on early childhood for a long time. So our mission is a good start for all kids, but also to add that it is also a good start for all parents. When we think about early childhood, of course, we are working more and more for very small kids, 0 to 5 years. And when we think about public spaces, mobility, and so on and so forth, how to get to those public spaces, we also think about from a point of view of two people. So because very young children don't decide where to go, how to go, and how long to stay there, there will always be a caregiver with them. So to really also bring in the lens of caregivers, of a parent, of an elder sibling, of a grandparent, who will walk with the child to that park and decide how long they stay there, whether there is adequate seating, whether there is lighting, and so on and so forth, that will allow them to stay and to be able to benefit from the public spaces around them. So we really think about kids, we also think of caregivers, but the way that we work is really to work with city and local governments, to what Natalie said earlier. We think about city leaders and how they work in their local context, but really how to support them and support some of the ideas that they would have and the priorities that they would have to center kids and families within that, and then to help them take those ideas to scale. And we do that through a range of things, through funding, through technical assistance, through policy design, through also study tours, executive education, and so on and so forth. But really to think about the approaches that city governments can take to the benefit of kids and families, and within their own priorities. And this would be relevant also for implementation. And what I'm going to say is that we have seen across priorities from cost of living to climate to migration, displacement, so on and so forth, it is possible to center kids and families and the spaces that they need around them within the agendas that are top of mind for city leaders. And we have a program to this end, which is called Urban 95. Urban 95 is not necessarily a program, it's a provocation. And what it does is that it asks the question to city leaders, to architects, to planners, to urbanists, to people who care about cities, of what would you do differently if you were to think of a city from the height of 95 centimeters, which is the height of a healthy 3-year-old child by WHO standards. And not only to think about kids, but also their caregivers, who will be the ones responsible for helping them utilize public spaces around them. And so with Urban 95, we worked now in various ways with about 180 cities all over the world, either directly or through the Urban 95 Academy, which is a program at the London School of Economics for knowledge sharing and helping with implementation. And in terms of thinking about some of the challenges of implementation, which we've seen in the past 7 years of working on Urban 95 with city governments, is that there are quite a number of challenges. So how do you really convince city governments and local governments that are not thinking of this actively? Of course, many cities will have these programs, but really to think about relating kids and families to public spaces in urban design, which is a lens that for urbanists, at least 7 years ago, was still new and is still new, and therefore to center early childhood in the work that they do. So, so the mind shift, kind of the thinking about what they can do for kids and families, what city leaders can do, is an important component. So how do you work on that for using a technical term, behavior change, not only in support of kids and families, but also for city governments and city leaders. And that takes sustained effort. We have seen in our work also, of course, capacity and training, and really then kind of putting your own feet to the fire if you are we are bringing some of these guidelines and so on to cities and city governments, then really working with them and helping them think about it, build ownership, and then think about implementing and scaling them. Also, we find challenges in funding at local level. We are a small philanthropy. Local government does not always have funding or does not always prioritize funding in quite the same way that we would like them for kids and families. Usually it is for large infrastructure, and therefore how do you work with them to be able to demonstrate, to be able to shift mindsets, to be able to talk about these little, the pocket park that you saw in Recife. That's also something that is valuable and will set the foundation for a child's life. And then I would say challenge in terms of also building ownership and demand for the local communities. And if we work only with city governments, it's of course city and convincing them and moving them forward is important, but also for people to use it and to be able to use that infrastructure. I think a generation ago, many of us were out and about cycling or walking or playing, and we've lost that in a generation. And kids cannot go out, and it's something perhaps that they've forgotten. Of course, there are challenges with technology, so to be able to constantly build that demand with the right infrastructure, but also with programming is quite important. So we have cities that have also taken up how to activate public spaces, and therefore have storytelling or have other initiatives, or on a regular basis. We have mayors coming in and telling stories to young kids in all of these cities, in some of these cities, regular programming that then helps bring families out. So in conclusion, I would just like to say that it needs a lot of patience for the partners that are working at the local level. It does take political will, and that actually takes relationship building across different governments, if you will, of governments change and political priorities change. It takes the ability to support cities to mobilize funding, also to think about data, and to be able to show them what it means, the situation of kids and families in cities and what it means. 2 examples, one in the city of Pune, where I've worked, Van Leer has done a lot of work, is I remember very clearly I was in a meeting with the municipal commissioner, which is equivalent to a mayor, and we had done a survey which showed that kids played outside in the city for 1 hour only. Most of the time was indoor in schools or at home. The mayor, the commissioner, she was shocked, and her expression said it all. And she just told us to keep going back to that slide. In all the 3 years of work we'd done in Pune, we'd not gotten the traction that we did from that one moment, and things shifted. So just, I think, in some ways, just to be able to show the reality is quite useful. And I would say then the ownership piece is very, very important, to be able to listen to cities. You see on the slide that we have several guidelines here, but the uptake of these has been a process of building ownership with cities, listening to them, working through it, updating it based on what the local realities are. And then the last piece I would say is partnerships. Really partnerships with partners here. We've of course worked with many people and many organizations at the table, and really getting core expertise in, but also local organizations and so on and so forth. So I'm happy to talk more, but that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rushda, for sharing not only all these tools that have been, contributing to advancing the agenda, and also to share the, ingredients for success, but also to pointing out to some of the challenges, right? To make us think of what needs to be done in order to overcome them. And I just would like to, reflect on a couple of points that you made about the partnership, about the innovation, about the funding, about the governance structures that actually we have seen, at least from a WHO perspective, when we are looking at urban health, right, more generally, that we have been identifying as actually the key mechanism that need to be implemented in order to really achieve an integrated approach to urban health and urban development, right, for health well-being and, generally for all the goals that we would like to set. So thank you very much, and we will have opportunities to discuss later. And I see here there are some additional examples that you have been working on. So with this, I would like to move to our second panelist, Skye Duncan, who is the Executive Director of the Global Designing Cities Initiative. And we are very happy to have you, Skye. Thank you very much for joining. Skye and her team have been developing the award-winning Global Streets Design Guide, which is really one of the key tools, right, that has been moving this agenda, and complemented also by the guidance on designing streets for kids, and actually a numerous additional, materials. And I think what I would like to highlight here is that Skye really comes from hands-on experience as an urban planner within one of the biggest cities of our world, New York, right? So when thinking about how to actually translate, this into action, Skye, you are very much, at the forefront of this, because you have been practically, working in this field, and knows what are the challenges, not only, technically speaking from, the background as a planner, but also in a political, I would say, even environment to do this. So with this, Skye, over to you, sharing, some of your experience and work.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Natalie. I wanted to start by asking everyone to close their eyes for just a second and to visualize the space that comes into your mind when I say streets. And open your eyes And raise your hand or let me know if cars were one of the first thing that popped into your head when you think about streets. So we're thrilled to be here participating in this conversation. At GDCI, we are kind of obsessed with streets in our cities. Our streets are our largest continuous network of public space that we have in our cities, and this huge untapped asset that we have to think about in terms of how we can address our children and all of our populations. Of course, it's wonderful to think about the playgrounds, the pocket parks, and so forth that we can make more inviting for our children. But we strongly believe that our streets are one of our fundamental public space typologies that we need to address in a comprehensive manner. As Natalie mentioned, we created the Global Street Design Guide a number of years ago now. This has been endorsed by 120 cities, regions, and organizations around the world. As a commitment to how we can kind of take our outdated hierarchical pyramid where cars have been king and we've basically forgotten about us as human beings who are at the heart of our cities. Our work is very driven by public health. You know, a lot of the stats from you guys, Natalie, your team, the fact that 99% of our population is breathing polluted air, the fact that over 80% of our young folks are not physically active enough, which Rishta was alluding to. You know, our streets are no longer safe for parents to feel like they can send their kids out to walk and cycle to school anymore. And it's our number one killer of young people, 5 to 29, is road traffic fatalities on our streets. So, you know, we really believe that we can make a shift from not only surviving on a daily basis, but actually how do we help our youngest folks thrive in urban environments. With the support of Rishta and BVLF and a number of other foundations, we were really excited to release Designing Streets for Kids a couple of years ago, free download in about, I think, 10 different languages at this stage on our website. And we really have two fundamental things we're trying to achieve in there. How do we help cities make sure that streets are not just seen as conduits for big metal boxes moving about our cities? It's a public health crisis, but it's also a spatial efficiency equation. As we have more people moving to cities, our public space is finite. So we need those street spaces to serve more functions and to serve more people. So how can our streets help our young folks move about in a more independent and improved way? So how can we make sure walking, cycling, transit is not just an add-on, but it's actually an authentic choice for people to choose to get around on a daily basis, to go to school, to go to playgrounds, parks, health services. But how can our streets also offer moments of pause and rest and play, right? To step aside when a toddler is having a tantrum, or to breastfeed under, you know, a shaded tree in a hot climate as a mother with a baby. How can we incorporate play along the way and check that we're not only getting our fundamentals of safety and accessibility right, but think about the other elements of comfort and convenience, and actually all the different spatial components of our street and the different stakeholders involved in making sure that that space can also be inspirational and educational and help our babies and caregivers build those strong neurons within our brains. How can we think about streets as places that foster love and joy, right? Terms that traffic engineers and planners don't often get to talk about in a daily basis. So our team works on creating this guidance, but we also have a lot of really practical guidance. We just released a couple of days ago here at WUF 2 handbooks, one around engaging kids in the process of street design, very practical with all the tools, another free download. And we strongly believe in data and measuring the impact of projects. So we work on paper, we create these global guidelines, but then we work directly with city governments. We're working with over 30 cities around the world, with mayors, with city officials, on what does it mean to get that on the ground. Natalie, you mentioned implementation. What does it mean to build capacity and offer trainings for engineers, planners, designers, mayors, enforcement, journalists? What does it mean if we're asking people to do things differently? Then we need to help train them and empower them with the tools that they need to make that change on the ground. and then we believe really strongly, as I mentioned, in data and measuring the impact of that work. The other handbook is particularly around evaluating street transformations near schools. Schools are a great place to start because they often have the easier entry point with some local champions that can help get street transformations on the ground. And so as you can see, this example here from Fortaleza in Brazil, where we have the before, we have the after, very visual documentation, but also the numbers, the stats of how that's improved, how it's getting better for kids. The city of Fortaleza is actually quite phenomenal as this type of project and a collective approach to reducing speed limits, to changing policy, updating design guidance, and getting projects on the ground. They've also seen the 8th consecutive year of reduction in road traffic fatalities, right? So this kind of play and kids is not just a nice to have. Like, we are literally talking about life and death situations here. So I think, you know, one of the biggest things in terms of getting this stuff on the ground is that none of us can do it on our own. It requires, you know, national, regional, city level. It means we have to remove impediments in our codes and guidelines that are often like 50, 60 years old. And we need to incentivize new types of street and public space implementation for kids and actually mandate it in some cases, I think. So, you know, I would encourage everyone in the room, like, you are part of that solution. So in whatever you are doing, please, I beg you to be bold, to, you know, sit at the conversations, whatever it may be, and be the annoying person who puts your hand up and says, excuse me, why are we doing this like this? Why are we sticking to the status quo? Why are we not challenging these norms? Because the way we have been doing things has led to so many global crises. And so sticking with the status quo is just not an option. So I really hope everyone here can be part of that solution, and excited for an ongoing discussion about this.
Thank you very much, Sky. This was extremely, you know, powerful, and again, showing us that we have also very concrete additional tools that will help us, right, to address some of the key priority areas, for example, that have been identified through the Spaces Guide, and also, you know, that they're really speaking to some of the key principles, right, that we have been presenting. And I think that, as you were saying, community engagement, right, making sure that whatever we do happens with actually involving those that will use those spaces is extremely important, and giving them also room to express what is needed, but also being them part of the whole process, because they ultimately will be the end users. And this brings me back actually to something that Rushda was saying before that I forgot to mention after your presentation, which I think is extremely important, is that we are talking about spaces for children. But as you were saying, Rushda, children very often don't come alone, right? They come with somebody. They come with parents, grandparents, caregivers. And therefore, yes, the focus is on children, because this is, you know, our target population group here, particularly important, you know, for our societies. But we need to see how the changes that we want to achieve, how they affect actually the whole community that goes together with the children. So it's like taking almost like a life course approach, right? And addressing that for children will mean being also useful for the other, you know, ages of our life. So with this, I would like to hand over to Giselle Zibak, who is the Executive Director of the International Society for Urban Health. As WHO, UNICEF, and UN Habitat, we have close collaboration with the International Society for Urban Health. And the International Society is very important because it really brings these two societies, right, that come actually from very different perspectives together. So it's the first society, right, looking at those two aspects in a joint manner. And Giselle has, you know, long-standing experience in working at the very local level, you know, at the municipal level as a planner, but also looking at implementing projects that are really serving communities on the ground with a very strong equity focus, trying to understand, right, what are really the measures that need to be implemented to really find equitable solutions for health outcome. Giselle, over to you.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation, Natalie and Thomas, Jose, and colleagues. And, you know, I have to say that creating healthy public spaces for children that are living in cities is something that I kind of accidentally became involved in, and actually it feels very full circle because I remember about 8 years ago, I think, or so, I was with Sky in Amsterdam, and we were exploring the city from the height of a, 3-year-old child, 95 centimeters, thanks to the Bernard Van Leer Foundation. So it's exciting to be up here today and to be talking about this. And, you know, just to say, I think we now know, and, you know, Sky said this and Natalie said this, but we now really know that public spaces for children play this critically important role in advancing our broader urban health agenda. Because those well-designed public spaces can become truly vital environments that support children's well-being and health and development and social engagement. And we know that when children have access to safe and vibrant public spaces, they can thrive. And so do our communities and our neighborhoods in our cities. And in fact, at ISUH, one of our key priority strategic areas is actually supporting urban health across the entire life course. And of course, that starts with children, and it includes caregivers, communities, and our older people as well. So just to say, you know, in addition to this new guide, to the Urban 95 guidance that we saw, to the Urban 95 Academy, to the many, many GDCI pieces of guidance that are amazing, by the way. If you have not downloaded them and used them, you must. They're incredible resources. The UNICEF handbook that Thomas mentioned. We also have cases, and many cases have been mentioned, and I just thought I would add to that from my perspective. You know, thinking about these public spaces that need to be designed with childhood development in mind and with children's needs really at the forefront. And we believe that this really means that it includes the active involvement and guidance from children themselves and their caregivers. And so the one experience that I want to talk about just very briefly today, my photo is not as beautiful, I think, as some of the others, but we can use our imaginations here. And this was from, it was actually one of the Urban 95 pilot projects in Bogota. In working with the community, we realized that Urban 95 didn't work that well in this community, so it was renamed Crezco con mi barrio, or I Grow with My Neighborhood. So of course, this panel is very, very familiar with that. And the goal for this project was really to transform the neighborhood into one that explicitly supported the health, well-being, and early childhood development needs of early childhood, as Rashta has said, age 0 to 3, and their caregivers. And so we decided for this project that we were going to create a children's priority zone in one of the most vulnerable neighborhoods in the city of Bogota. And this is a place where early childhood development rates were some of the worst in the city. It was really a notorious place for gang violence. Sadly, there were frequent homicides, there was violent crime. And one of the things that we did to even decide where we were going to work is we mapped the entire city to try to understand where we saw the greatest challenges in terms of children's health and safety and development. And we ultimately chose this neighborhood here, which is La Acacia in Ciudad Bolivar. It's partly informal, just to get back to some of the designations or different contexts that Thomas mentioned that are in the guide. You know, it's partly informal, it's very vulnerable, but it has a lot of those challenges that Thomas mentioned that we see in informal areas. Like there was trash everywhere, you can see a little bit of that. There were some really unsafe areas. And when we first went there, actually, you know, we had to be accompanied by armed guards, which was really unpleasant and not very nice to be walking around with security. And we noticed that there were no children playing outside at all. There were no children playing outside, no one interacting outside. And we found out that was really because the violence and the gang activity made it where nobody felt safe. Parents didn't feel safe to have their children go outside. And so they weren't getting adequate physical activity. You know, they weren't meeting each other. They weren't socializing with each other. And parents were anxious. They were isolated because they couldn't socialize or connect with other parents themselves. And they were stressed out. And they really didn't have many opportunities to support each other. And then there was, you know, this issue that even if you had felt comfortable to go outside, which they didn't, there was no place to go. There was no nature. There was nothing beautiful. There was really a lot of trash. And then there was no place to sit, and there was no shade. It was hot outside. and the roads were incredibly dangerous. There were really fast cars whipping around. I remember on this exact street in one of these pictures here, there's a school right across the street, and these big trucks would come whipping up and down those streets. And I remember one time we were there, there was a parent taking their kid to school, and the child fell because it's a little small toddler, and the child fell in the street, and a huge truck was coming up. It was really scary. So that was not a nice experience. As you said, road safety, huge issue. And it was at night, it was dark. The gangs would move in, and there was drug trafficking taking place. So there were some existing parks or play areas. I would say they weren't really parks. Play areas, they were very rusty. They were dangerous. There were needles. You get the picture, right? I mean, this was not a nice place to be. And so what did we do? How did we try to address some of these issues, broader issues of urban health, urban planning, and how that really affected early childhood development, safety, and welfare of children and caregivers? Well, at the direction of Mayor Peñalosa, who was the mayor at the time, we identified a local NGO. This was Casa de la Infancia, and we hired a local project manager who actually was housed in the Department of Social Development. That was Juan David Villamarin. I'm still in touch with him. We're still really good friends. And his job was essentially to work with the various city departments that included transportation, parks and recreation, health, urban planning, housing, environment, the Participation Institute, the local mayor, and many, many more. And this was a really hard job that he had, actually. He had to convince all these different departments that transforming one of the most, stigmatized neighborhoods in the entire city into one that explicitly supported the health and well-being of young children should be a priority that each of these different departments should actually give a portion of their budget to, and that they should care about and that they should prioritize. So after it was hard work. He did an amazing job. It was often frustrating. But after, we had dozens and dozens and dozens of community meetings, we had public space activations, we had continuous community mapping. For example, one of my favorites that we did was a stroller mapping activity where we went with the parents and caregivers all around the neighborhood with their strollers to understand where there were challenges in navigation. And so after, more than 2 years, I believe that we truly began to transform this neighborhood into one where kids and their caregivers could actually spend time outside. And then something else changed at the same time, and that was also pride in the neighborhood itself and civic engagement. So, practically, what did we do? We were able to get more than 800 new lights in, LED lights, to allow sports activities, pedestrian and mobility to continue safely after dark at night. We added more than 300 meters of green space, including this really cool, what we call the Eco Aula, which is this really nice picture where you see the little girl pouring some water onto the plants, where we called it sort of an outdoor environmental classroom where the kids could learn about environmental sustainability, how to grow healthy foods, interact with nature. We even had a community-designed water feature. You can't really see it. It's behind the kids there, but a community member actually designed a beautiful mosaic because he worked in construction, and that was his contribution. That was really cool. The area was cleaned up. There were plantings and flowers that were really nice. There were new playgrounds that were planted, actually, and maintained by the neighbors. That was really big. The city kept saying to us, if we plant things, it will be stolen. And you know what? Okay, they were stolen once. But then then we replaced them again. And after that, they were not, and the community really maintained them. We did public art projects. There were 4 new murals that were designed and actually painted by the residents themselves. There were 3 of these new playgrounds here that you can see that were designed specifically for younger children, age 0 to 3, which really City of Bogota didn't have any of. That wasn't easy, as Sky will know, because it wasn't in the handbook of available options. So we had to actually design new ones that had lower fall distances, that had soft materials on the ground, that had grab bars for little kids who were just learning to walk, so that's new. And also, importantly, I don't know if you can see there, but there's a bench in that park. So parents and caregivers could also sit and meet themselves, socialize themselves, and safely watch their kids play. That wasn't there before. New play routes, new crosswalks, so people could safely get to preschools and schools and community centers. We had something called the pop-up play kit, which was very cool. Community and a caregiver designed, and it would be activated at different moments before and after school, and then it would go back to the school at night. And so finally, the neighbors were all out actually enjoying their neighborhood together. They were less isolated. They were engaging in physical activity. They were interacting with nature in some way. They were walking more safely to get to those preschools and community centers and home. And they became sort of proud of this neighborhood. There was this new sense of pride that wasn't there before. Because people from the adjacent neighborhoods, actually, they would come over with their kids to use these new public spaces. And some of the local residents, this is kind of crazy because before they were so, as anyone who's worked on these types of projects will know, they were so skeptical of government, skeptical that anything would change, and there was a lot of distrust. But after this process, actually, some of the local residents ran for local office, and they became engaged in changing things for their neighborhood, even at the local government level. And so what we also measured, so Skye mentioned this, and it's going to be my takeaway. This is sort of my last main point, is what did we learn from this process? But we actually were able to measure pretty significant changes in terms of physical health and mental health and social engagement and social capital, as well as changes in, traffic accidents and road safety. And then really we also saw massive drops in violent crime, among other things. So what are the lessons learned? Why am I telling you all of this? And actually, this was reiterated, and it's also all in the guide that was mentioned at the beginning here. So these are all sort of different areas that were mentioned. But the community, I believe, from these types of experiences, the community really needs to lead the process, and that's for a couple of reasons. That's for that participation area that was mentioned, and that's in the guidance, that the new guidance that was mentioned here in the beginning. But also for the ongoing maintenance and sustainability of these projects. If the community, is bought in, if they're the ones, of course, that can best identify what their needs are, what their challenges are, but they're also going to be the ones to continue to make sure that these changes are maintained for the good of the kids, of the caregivers, and of their community. So that's one. Also, another thing, and this is also in the guide, you can... Yep, okay, no problem. This is the last thing. You can unlock these different funding areas through the different city agencies, and then also you have to measure, both quantitatively and quantitatively what those impacts are. And so just finally, as Mayor Peñalosa says, children are these indicator species, and if we can build a successful city for children, we're going to have a successful city for all people, which we definitely saw in this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giselle. And I know that all of our panelists have actually such, a wealth of experience, but also so much to share. So actually, we would love to be the whole day in this session. And actually, I'm very pleased that I see that it's very well attended. So thank you very much. Thanks, Giselle. Maybe I'm doing this on behalf of Giselle because she was, she didn't do it today. I just would like to say that in 2 weeks from now, in 10 days from now, the International Society for Urban Health will be organizing its conference on urban health in Marrakesh. And again, this is a really example, right, where the different professionals that are important for this, area of work are coming together. And UN Habitat and WHO are co-sponsoring the event. I'm sure UNICEF will do soon. This is really showing that, and Gila, you were speaking about intersectoriality, about the need of having the different sectors, pulling on the same string. And so this needs to happen on the ground, but also the support that comes from, development organizations, partners, needs to come from all those different sectors. So I'm very happy that UN Habitat and WHO will be, co-sponsoring the event, and good luck with the upcoming conference. And keeping, this idea of multidisciplinarity and, intersectoriality, I would like to now move to our last panelist, Mariana Alegre, who is the Executive Director and founder of Sistema Urbano. Encantada, Mariana. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
And Mariana is really promoting projects that are having the ecosystem, right, at the center of the discourse, ecosystem at the city level, and really where she is bringing together aspects of urban mobility, public spaces, cities and urbanism, social movements, everything, into one approach. And the reason why I was saying that this intersectoriality or interdisciplinarity is so important is that actually Mariana holds a master in human rights, city design, and social science. And I'm just mentioning this because if we want to advance this agenda, we need to bring together the experience and the knowledge and the expertise of those different sectors. And so just to name a few, these ones are for me very important. So Mariana will today be representing the Public Space Network and speaking on behalf of the network, and thank you very much for sharing your experience.
Thank you to Natalie, and I'm very happy to be here. I'm sorry I was late. I actually forgot my badge, so I was in the taxi, and I got to go back, bring it, and of course Egypt and the long distances. So yeah, and I will say that when we started working with cities, we have no architects in the team. So it was quite a game changer back in Peru in that moment, because everyone who was speaking about cities were mainly architects and, of course, men. So when we start working with it, we kind of work through like this opening and wider approach that brings different perspectives, including the one of the children. And I will say that, of course, everyone who has a child, a daughter, a son, the city experience changed dramatically. I remember vividly the first day I got out of my house after giving birth to my daughter, and I have to take her to the hospital for her healthy checkup. It was, 10-year-old. So I was walking for the same streets I have walked forever, and the noises, the trucks, like the sidewalks without like something to go, like an accessibility. I actually carried the pushchair and put it down in the street. It was horrific. And I do remember it clearly, because then when you are actually stepping in the shoes of someone else, then you feel it in these different perspectives. So back in 2012, I was living in London doing that city design and social science master, and my daughter was 3-year-old. So I started experiencing the city from actually these 95 centimeters that Urban Banlieue then put all this program on. And my dissertation, my thesis was actually about it, the point of view of this 3-year-old walking through the streets of London, but also trying to compare these different spaces that the children are able to be in, like some kind of like controlled spaces, like the playgrounds, like maybe the museums, and also these other free spaces, like the streets, like the sidewalks. And the experience was importantly different. And also, and it was horrific, I deep dive in this online world of people hating children and willing for them not to be in the public space, not to be sharing spaces with them, willing to forbid them to access restaurants, to access planes, to access different spaces. And this was not only amazingly eye-opening in terms of how this idea of children not having rights and being like this subhuman is so ingrained in society. And I'm talking like a lot of years ago. I'm talking like 10 years ago, kind of. So that was incredible to actually witness and to be aware that it existed. And I was also looking forward in this idea of when we are experiencing the city with my daughter, and I, for example, was in a bus stop waiting for a bus, and we can see like the maps, and we can see the routes, and we can read the signs, and what they see, like the trash, like these horrible, probably already rusted poles where the signs are put on. So this is actually the experience of this other group of humans that we share our life and our cities with. So then, after that, in one of our festivals, we have this yearly festival in Latin America. We met the Van Leer Foundation, I guess it was maybe 2015 or so. And I truly, truly believe that the work they have done in the region, in Latin America, has had this amazing impact, not only in kind of like covering and spreading all over the places, even though some of the projects are, of course, come and go, and that's it, because, of course, of the nature of the funding, of the nature of the projects, the impact remains. And I have seen that not only, I have seen that in urban mobility, but also in the child perspective, and I truly credited it to this amazing organization. So one of our projects in our urban ecosystem is Ocupa tu Calle. In English is Occupy Your Street. In Portuguese is Ocupa tu Rua. And this project was willing, of course, of building public spaces to making the spaces of the city available to the people. And I will say we did something, I will not say with no permits, but actually with no permits. And we try to contest the idea of actually having the local officers being cut out with their regulations, and then we try to kind of untie these processes. And with that, we also get to involve the children perspective in maybe all of the over 50 projects that we have been doing in Latin America and Peru. From safe rates to school, from transforming garbage. There was a school, it was like horribly mistreated. And when we actually change it and paint it and start working with the community, the enrollment rate of the academic year increased in that moment. It was amazing. It has nothing to do with actually quality of education. We were not working with the teachers, but the idea and the identity, it shifted completely from like a school called the garbage school, because they were actually burning garbage in front of it, to actually being these amazing sources of pride for the community. And also working now with urban kitchens, because of course in Latin America, due to the pandemic, you have a lot of hunger, a lot of poverty. So now we're working to bring them together with also this idea. So we start connecting early on with others, not only in our country, but also in Latin America. We have the amazing help of the UN Habitat and the Fundación Avina projects in all of our conferences, and we start building a lot of little books with cases from Latin America, also trying to bring the voice of Latin America to the world. In that process, also, we get to these citizen-led urbanism models. We work with the placemaking network in Latin America, and also, of course, all of this involved with this public space network and these global networks that we have already displayed all over the world, and with also a UN Habitat public space program, which actually helped a lot into bring us together and actually giving us the strength, the force, and the visibility to keep doing what we are doing. So the process on this is a way of getting back to the roots in terms of how to include the process of the children, from like the engagement, from the design process, from also the sustainability. But what I think is the most important thing is to actually shift their own minds into thinking that they do have rights, that they do deserve a great city to be in, and that they will be keeping and compelling to actually fight for their rights when they can. And they are doing it right now. So we are with also UN Habitat and Jose here and Avina trying to escalate a process that we've been working in Lima, which is the Public Spaces Pact. With all of these years working with, it is very, very difficult to work with mayors and with public officers, because there's a lot of changes, there's like different things happening. So it will take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money to actually be able to get one government on. But when we were discovering that was actually one important challenge, we decided to shift it, and then we create this Public Space Pact. The mayors then are willing to actually adhere, and then we have, in the case of Peru, 45 local governments willing to do stuff for public spaces, including children's perspective and so on. Some of them will be more involved than others, of course, but yeah, it was working. So finally, I want you to imagine, and you of course know about it, this beautiful and amazing park with a playground, with children playing, with people looking at them, kids laughing, all the photos you have seen here, and all the idea of a vibrant public space. And sadly, that space could be gone in a minute. And that was just what happened back in Lima 2 weeks ago, where we have these amazing playgrounds and these amazing public spaces, and they were actually bulldozed with these big machines one night. And it is a way on we should not be losing public spaces, not even for building highways or not even for building anything without the consideration of including the children and the spaces in the processes. So this is why I was talking about the kids being able to fight too, because now they are seeing how they are being rid of their own public spaces. So that's why the networks and the work that every organization here is doing is so important to keep going. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mariana. And maybe just to highlight 2 points, just from, what you have been just sharing, is the importance also of the networks, right? The importance of being able to share experiences, but also to draw on this collective power, right? When you have a network of professionals, but also policymakers that are exchanging ideas, but also finding a common ground, things can be sometimes slightly easier. And the second point is the notion of sustainability. So when we discuss about implementing all this guidance, all these best practices, all these policies, what needs to be done in order then to make sure that this is going to be lasting, very long, and that not from one day to the other, they are not part anymore of an urban priority. So thanks to all our panelists. We have 10 minutes to go. And maybe I would like just to start by opening to the floor. If you have any questions to the panelists, but also if you have any thoughts, right, based on your experience on the different areas of work that you are engaged with about what is needed to make sure that the guidance that we have been presenting today and that will be launched early next year, but all the other documents and, advice that colleagues have been presented are actually translated, into action. So any thoughts, any advice, any ideas, any experience would be extremely beneficial. And then the second maybe question to all of you, to all of us, is maybe we will be launching this guide, right, early next year. And I think it's important to collectively think, what are the opportunities, right, where we can position that launch? So what do we need to do to make sure that the guide will not be presented to the converted, meaning to those who already know that it's important, right? But how is it important that this guide will reach those that actually through their actions will ultimately be able to change? So with those two questions in mind, if the panelists and the colleagues agree, I would like to hand over to you for some reflections and thoughts. I'm really sorry for the noise. You have to be very loud. Do we have a mic? There is a mic over there. Is there a mic? So the gentleman first and then the lady, please. Do we have a microphone? Is there a mic? There is a microphone there. You can, pardon me, you can stand up and speak from the microphone.
Ahmed Al-Saidi. I'm working with the CSOs. My name is Ahmed Al-Saidi. I'm working with the CSO. Part of my work is with children and also the coexistence and inclusion. Thank you so much for this panel. First, there are many things that you have mentioned, the principles of the open spaces, and it's my first time to address such a topic. But I have a question. If there is a street, I didn't see any cars or vehicles in the street. I just saw here that there are children without shelter, and there were some programs, but they are not available anymore. So my question is, what can the Habitat do to the people with disabilities, especially in the open spaces, and how can we make these spaces accessible to the people with disabilities? How can they integrate with the normal children? Also for the children without shelter, and we can see them in many areas, especially in the informal settlements.
Thank you very much. I think two important points have been at least mentioned to me. It's obviously the integration also, right, of public spaces also as a place, right, for integration, and also in particular for low-income communities. Somebody from the floor who wants to go, you and Habitat or our colleagues? Jose.
Yes, thanks a lot for the question. I think it's quite fundamental. there is a role, there is several programs, and I will start like with global agendas probably, no? So I think it's a mechanism for us like to push certain agendas. The SDG 11.7 that is on public space basically promotes accessibility, universal design, and it's like it have like several target groups, no? So it's like what we have found basically is that the cities doesn't have accessibility first like to the space, but also the quality of that space. So I think like this is something like to push. Normally what we have like as a mechanism is like to push to the local governments like to manage like to achieve that, no? So it's like we can push as a mechanism to follow up like the SDG 11.7. But there is a role on the local government like to be able like to improve the conditions. But I think like what was highlighted for Mariana, the last panelist, is like the role also of the community to push certain agendas, because it's like what we have been doing is like supporting these groups or collective to communicate with the local governments and to voice their demand. So I think like this communication is fundamental. But it's like if you don't have like a voice of the citizen, like it's very difficult like to change conceptions. Maybe to highlight, like a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, like we did a publication, like the IDB promote a publication that was like a citizen urbanism. So it's like the voice of the citizen, like to fight like for the rights and how to do it. And if the local governments or the authorities don't do it, they do it by themselves, like through community participation processes. And I think like that really help, because we know that it's like sometimes like local governments are overwhelmed because of the activities, but also it's important that like people do it, and there are like some mechanisms, like for example, there are like some fundings that can be international funding, local fundings, but also with CSR. I think like we have been working a lot with foundations that, as Manlier Foundation, that they take care about these things and take action actually on the public space and how to improve like for people with disabilities, but also for children.
Thank you very much, Jose.
Nisreen Mukhtar. I'm a member of Human Rights, a mother and a teacher. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank the Amazon fighters. Also, I'd like to thank every mind and every spirit who I listened to today. Thank you for this effort. Really, it's an amazing effort. As a mother, I thank you here. My question. Why didn't you use the strength of children and mother to defend the places that you are having now and to defend their rights? Why didn't you build on the mothers you have in the sectors that you are serving to support you financially, emotionally, and to defend the efforts, the tremendous efforts that you are exerting in all these places? And are there places now in the Middle East or in the Arab region or even here in Egypt, are there these places where I can support your effort in any of these areas? Thank you so much from heart.
So can I maybe, yes, Mariana.
Okay, do you need to put on your, okay, so absolutely, and we felt it. We felt it perfectly. Yeah, no, it was clearly emotional, and I really appreciate it. We do involve community, and actually it is not also about us as an intermediate organization, because we are a facilitator for these processes, but communities itself put together and organize. They have been protesting a lot. They have been doing their signs, their march. They actually went into the middle of the night to actually hold on and put a halt on the bulldozers actually going through the park. They managed to put a stop on it, put a pause on it for a while, but it is a battle that is actually being lost. It is unfortunately, we have actually one of my promises for the community was to actually be here sharing internationally the abuse that is happening there. But community is actually getting together. And it is crazy because when this process was start to begin, and this was this community leader, Eduardo, working a lot on giving the spark and these spaces, amazing opportunities to actually be built and stuff, and bringing local government money to budgeting and stuff and to build on it. And he was working with maybe 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 neighbors that were quite active. Now, when it was attacked, they appear like hundreds of them, willing to actually protect the space. So because you will have two types of people involvement. One, directly, the ones that are there working, like Jose, like the other people that are working in these spaces with us, for example. But then you will have the other people that are actually enjoying the space and learning from the experience that they deserve this. They maybe they were not aware of how important that space was for them, and now they have realized. So we do have a society divide in here. It's all over the news in Lima, and we have like maybe a lot of people pushing for the mayor to keep doing that, because that was a right of way for a highway that is not even yet having like a technical procedure nor a starting date. So it is like for absurd. And also we have a lot of other people saying, wait, we need these spaces for the children. And also we can wait for the works to actually start to actually take them out and to keep the different equipment safely and bring them to other people. But no, the idea here is actually to destroy. Because in this democratic fragility that we are having in so many regions, we have this idea of the mano dura, like the hard hand to actually do stuff. And that's a huge menace, not only to society, but I do think that public spaces, as the spaces that are representing democracy and inclusivity and the idea of common, it is actually one of the most biggest threats for authoritarian governments. So we need to keep the spaces for us and to keep fighting for them. So thank you.
Can I suggest that we can also, after, continue conversation? Yeah. Thank you very much, because, and we are running out of time, but I see that there is a lot of interest. So if you allow, maybe Sky and Richard, you wanted to respond to that, and then we had one additional question, and then we need to close. If you can still, first we have the colleagues replying still to this question, and then please.
Just quickly, I think one thing, certainly from a perspective of streets, when you try and change streets, there is often a huge amount of pushback. If you try and take any space away from private automobiles, we find people come out with like pickaxes and they want to fight till the end. And we get often a minority of voices, but they're the loudest voices. And so we find the voices of caregivers and children are too often missing from these conversations. And when we even try and do engagement, it's too difficult, right? As a full-time mum, working full-time, we all are suffering from like time poverty as well, right? So the time to go to a community engagement session and make your voice heard is really difficult. So I think finding engagement strategies that can also go to the caregivers, working with schools, working with educators, so that having their voices heard and part of the fight for change and a better future for children, I think we need to take our processes to the children and to the caregivers so that it's easy for them, for their voices to be part of the process, rather than the systems we have don't typically include them. So it's a really important aspect of it, I think.
Maybe to add, because you asked for an example from this part of the world, is that we do work in Jordan. Many partners work in Jordan, and one of the ways that we are bringing in the voices of communities, especially mothers, is through this concept of family hubs, where within parks and playgrounds, some of the municipalities we work in Irbid, they have buildings that we are converting, and when I say we, it's not the Venlier Foundation, but collectively as a community converting into spaces where families can come, especially mothers, and get services that support kids and mothers and also the family as a whole. And what that has done is really build demand, as I said earlier, for families of young kids and mothers and parents and caregivers to realize that these are important services. And what that is doing is also because we are working through the city government, or the city government is really in the lead of doing this. It builds this engagement with the citizens and with city governments, and it has become a model now where we started with one and now it's in 6 different places in one city. And so there are models where this is working, but it's not easy work, as my colleagues highlighted, and mothers are the fiercest warriors and we need to mobilize them more. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. With permission of the panel and of the audience, we'll take the last question. You raised your hand. Short, please, and then question to the... And then we'll come to an end, unfortunately, but I'm inviting all of you certainly to reach out and then continue discussion. So, over to you.
Okay, so I would just want to thank the whole panel for the information. You did a good job with that. And the project itself, I wish it all to be programmed to the whole international system. Just one little question. What measures can be taken to ensure that these child-friendly spaces are resilient to socio-economic disparities by also promoting inclusivity across diverse urban settings? I just have another question, which is a long one, so I neglected it, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Your first question is already quite challenging, so thank you very much. Somebody from the panel who wants to go?
I can say briefly, I think part of working with any city government directly is doing a really solid analysis of existing conditions and identifying what are the primary challenges and where can we strategically invest where the need is the highest. So I think sometimes that can be looking at the demographic information, it can be looking at the different neighborhood structures or built forms and mapping that and overlaying pieces of information so we can say, look, if we have limited resources, which every city government does and every organization, how do we invest that in a way that we believe we can get the best impact, or we can affect and improve the lives of the most amount of children? So I think certainly kind of layering in that socioeconomic information into a spatial plan and kind of built environment with that information is a really great place to start, to know, and even public health data, to know where kids are suffering the most so that the investment in streets, public spaces, new amenities can impact those who have the biggest need.
Only a quick example. In our analysis, we found that, for example, the availability of public space normally are in informal areas. So it's like how you can assure that at least you have a playground or a public space in the informal areas and in slums where the people need more. One example, Medellin, I think it's very well known in Colombia. That is one of the cities who was most dangerous in Colombia itself, and they did a great strategy on public space, public facilities, public libraries to assure, but also with programming of the space to assure that it's the investment of the city was going not to the formal area, to the richest neighborhood, but also to the parts that they need more.
Thank you, Jose. And last word, Giselle?
Just to add, I think what Sky was saying is so important. I think from our perspective, from an urban health perspective, we're always thinking about urban health equity. So we're actually mapping and looking at the places in the city, the neighborhoods and communities in the city that have the worst health disparities, and we're actually trying to work there. So it's the hardest place, but that's the way that we make sure that we're not adding new public spaces to places that maybe don't need it as much, or we're not going to have as great of an urban health impact on those communities. We're actually looking at and working in the places that need the most additional support to make sure that they have urban health environments that support their health the same way everybody else does.
I think we have a very last word.
I was just going to mention, I think the other strategy is thinking about the spaces we already have and how can we transform them and investments. But we can also look at a lot of the new neighborhoods and new investments that are happening. So projects funded by development banks and national governments. How do we at least make sure we're not making the same mistakes in the stuff we're building today, so that we're all here in 20 years talking about how to redo the stuff that's getting built today and tomorrow. Like, how do we also get the new stuff right as well as transforming the spaces that we've got?
Thank you very much, Sky. And a big thanks to all our panelists. Thank you for sharing, all the work that you have been doing, all your experience. Thanks to my colleagues for, this adventure that has been going on for a couple of years. And most importantly, thanks to all of you for not only your interest, of being here, but for sharing your ideas, for making, this work, and for your energy, for your willingness, to move this agenda forward. And we really hope that the guide and all the other, documents and guidance documents will, make a change. And we are looking forward to continue to collectively work on this important agenda item. And I'm really happy that we are talking about children, and I see that we have a representative of, the young generation in the room. And I'm really very happy that, yes, we can collectively, build a healthier future for our children. So a big thanks, a good end of the WUF to all of you, and see you soon, and please reach out. Thank you very much.